Mandatory disclaimer before the presentation starts, we will be using the term queer. In trying to avoid the redundant usage of members of the LGBTQ plus community, instead we will be referring to queer people. Queer is a term which has been reclaimed by the LGBTQ community and now serves as an all-encompassing term for those who do not deem themselves straight or cisgender. Hello everyone, today Lainey and I will be giving a presentation on the Stonewall Uprising. First, let's set the scene by delving into the stigma of the 1960s. In this time period, many citizens of America held strong Christian values. There was much stigma amongst citizens who did not practice Christianity. One could easily be judged for actions such as not attending church, having premarital relations, and/or maintaining atheist beliefs. These behaviors were seen as anti-God, sinful, and perverted. As America ran on Christian values, anyone who acted in a non-Christian manner was also seen as anti-American and as one who would prevent the wholesome growth of America as a nation. One of the highest perceived sins at the time was any engagement in homosexuality. For example, a man who declares his love for another man would be heavily judged by the majority of the American populace. This man could be seen as one who was sent by Satan himself and/or who is on a mission to destroy our Christian America. Furthermore, many associated homosexuality with pedophilia, assuming that all gay men were also pedophiles. All of this stigma caused the hate and prosecution of queer people that we see today. During this time period, there were multiple laws prohibiting even just the public existence of people in the LGBTQ community. At any time before 1980, homosexuality was absolutely illegal in all manners. Before 1966, serving alcohol to members of the LGBTQ community was absolutely illegal and a punishable offense. After 1966, this became legal, however, any behavior deemed as queer in these bar or club spaces was completely prohibited, under laws of morality and disorderly conduct. These laws had been in place many years prior and declared that same-sex couples could not kiss, hold hands, dance together, or show any public displays of affection. Effeminate dressage of male patrons was forbidden as well. If the previously mentioned behaviors were spotted at gay bars and clubs, the establishment would have their liquor license revoked and then would legally be unable to serve alcohol. Over time, these laws have been repealed, and members of the LGBTQ community can legally express themselves freely, but still with high risk of discrimination. For example, in 1980, homosexuality was legalized in New York for the first time, and finally in 2011, gay marriage was legalized. Long story short, much progress has been made due to the events of the Stonewall riots. These aforementioned anti-gay laws have violated the civil rights of queer people. According to Britannica, civil rights are the guarantees of equal social opportunities and the equal protection under the law regardless of race, religion, or other personal characteristics. Essentially, every person in the U.S. should be equally treated in the eyes of the law enforcement. Local law enforcement in New York was also known to violate the civil rights of queer Americans, and were lenient to hate crimes which targeted members of the LGBTQ community. The NYC police would commonly stake out places where queer people often frequented. This included bars, clubs, public restrooms, and etc., in an attempt to catch disorderly conduct. Raids of gay bars and clubs were routine by law enforcement and aimed to incarcerate queer people. The Stonewall Inn was raided monthly before the uprising. We will now begin examining the events which occurred the day of the Stonewall Uprising.
Hi, I'm Clint Smith, and this is Crash Course Black American History. And today, we're learning about Marsha P. Johnson and the Stonewall Rebellion. Serving as a pivotal moment in the modern gay rights movement, Stonewall began on June 28, 1969, and lasted 6 days in New York City's Greenwich Village. And even though the rebellion itself lasted less than a week, the reverberations lasted for generations. Out of Stonewall emerged the establishment of one of the first gay pride parades, increased activism and organizing on behalf of gay people, and greater attention paid to the rights and needs of LGBTQ communities. At the heart of this organizing were Black and women of color activists like Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. They were important catalysts who held organizational prowess and a passion for change, inspiring countless queer people around the world to stand up against bigotry and discrimination from the broader society. Let's start the show. Let's begin with the events of the Stonewall Rebellion. Leading up to the night of June 28, 1969, the popular gay bar, the Stonewall Inn, and the queer community more generally were under surveillance by the New York City police. The Stonewall Inn and other bars that primarily serve LGBTQ communities were under constant attack by law enforcement. But this was also the era when queer desire and actions, even just holding hands, kissing, or dancing with someone of the same sex, were criminalized. This was due to a massive effort by the US government and law enforcement agencies like the FBI, which resulted in arrest, harassment, and sometimes the threat of public exposure for people who were not public about their sexual orientation, especially at a time when it was incredibly dangerous to be. As a result, places like Stonewall became the center of gay nightlife and served as a refuge from ongoing persecution. It was an important site of safety away from the scrutiny and public harassment of police and from the rest of society. Police arrived at Stonewall that night for a raid to crack down on gay bars that were operating without a New York State Liquor Authority license. This was routinely used as an excuse to harass gay bars during this time. However, this was also because the state refused to give liquor licenses to bars that served the gay community. Soon, mafia affiliates and other opportunists began to run the establishment and allegedly made deals with police to cover everything up and stay in business. During the raid, patrons and employees of Stonewall were frisked, assaulted, and dragged into the street. But those patrons, employees, and other neighborhood residents also fought back, refusing to accept treatment like this at the hands of people who should have been protecting them rather than harassing them. The resulting protests lasted for 6 days on both Christopher Street and adjacent blocks. Authorities hosed people in the streets, threw tear gas at them, and arrested them. But the Stonewall activists continued to resist, forming rocket-style kick lines in front of the police, smashing windows, uprooting parking meters, and throwing bottles at the authorities. They chanted slogans like, "Liberate the bar," and "We shall overcome." And at the heart of this rebellion were two transgender women of color, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Accounts of the night of the Stonewall raid and the subsequent rebellion vary widely, but Johnson and Rivera were among those who fought back and resisted arrest. Some recall Marsha being in full drag. Some remember it differently. Some stories of the night recall Johnson being the first person to throw a brick at the police, while other records exclude her entirely. The exact order of who did what first remains unclear, in part because there's limited documentation of the events that night. But in a 1987 interview with historian Eric Marcus, Johnson stated that she hadn't arrived that night to Stonewall until the uprising was well underway. She also said that the police had forced her and others onto the bar's wall to line up and be frisked the night before the rebellion began, and then the police returned the next day to set Stonewall on fire. On the 1-year anniversary of the rebellion, on June 28, 1970, thousands marched in the streets of Manhattan from Stonewall Inn to Central Park. They called their march Christopher Street Liberation Day, and it was one of America's first gay pride parades.
The Stonewall Uprising occurred in the Stonewall Inn, a local gay bar in Greenwich Village, New York City. The uprising would take place in 1969 and would last 5 days, from June 28th to July 3rd. The Stonewall Inn was a popular gay bar in the 1960s. In gay bars and clubs like these, many felt free to express themselves, leading to reports of disorderly conduct and shutdowns of many queer spaces. The Stonewall Inn was owned by one of the largest mafia families in New York at the time. The inn needed support from the mafia in ownership and liquor supply because of the previously mentioned liquor laws. Mafia, on the other hand, owned and supplied alcohol to this gay bar as an opportunity for cash, not because they supported gay rights. The NYC officers began tensions on the day of June 28, 1969, by raiding the Stonewall Inn. Once the struggle had begun, the officers called for backup in the form of aggressive men in riot gear. Officers then proceeded to beat patrons with clubs and batons and arrest many in a hostile manner. The law enforcement was even said to have hosed down Stonewall patrons with water and even used tear gas on them. Even non-confrontational patrons were attacked by the officers using intimidation tactics like shouting derogatory words and threatening their freedom. These threats were mostly used to target transgender men and people of color at the Stonewall Inn. Although these raids happened regularly, this time it was different. The patrons decided to finally fight back against the discrimination. While some were resisting wrongful arrest, others started throwing bottles, bricks, and coins. Jeers were shouted at the officers with contempt, and rocket kick lines were formed around the bar. This was all an attempt to stop the brutal harassment from police. Marsha P. Johnson, a transgender woman, was present at the Stonewall Inn the night of June 28, 1969. She is known in the LGBTQ history for strongly defending the rights of her and the other patrons at the Stonewall Inn during the aggressive raid. Johnson is known as the woman who threw the first brick. This is in reference to when law enforcement progressively started getting more aggressive with the patrons at the Stonewall Inn. She finally decided that enough was enough and started fighting back, an attempt to protect herself and the others who were aggressively being detained, wrongfully attacked, and soon to be incarcerated. Some say that Johnson was the first woman to throw the first brick. Others believe that it wasn't bricks that she was throwing, but rather shot glasses at mirrors. There are also sources that say that Johnson climbed up a lamppost and dropped her purse onto a police car, shattering its windshield. One thing that all these stories have in common is she was one of the first patrons at the Stonewall Inn to stand up against the police brutality. Following the events at the Stonewall Inn, Marsha P. Johnson continued advocating for homeless LGBTQ youth, HIV and AIDS, and gay and transgender rights. Following a pride parade in 1992, the worst year on record for anti-LGBTQ violence, Marsha P. Johnson was found dead in the Hudson River. Police investigations ruled Johnson's death as a suicide, but her friends held a very strong doubt. The case was then reclassified as a drowning with an undetermined cause. Many felt outraged because no matter how hard the police were pushed, they would not investigate further into Johnson's death. She to this day is still a hero to the civil rights movement. The scale of this uprising was like the U.S. had not seen before. The Stonewall Uprising had had more media coverage than any act of queer violence at its time. The story was shared to masses of people, finally opening the eyes of many to the unequal protections of queer citizens. This uprising, for the first time, showed a prime example of the police brutality, homophobia in law enforcement, and the determination of the U.S. citizens to stand up for the equal rights. This public awareness of queer violence made it to city levels, then state levels, which led to the eventual repealing of anti-LGBTQ lawmaking. Ronald Onfrey, a gay man in New York, was arrested in 1978 on charges of deviant sexual intercourse. Onfrey was engaging in consensual sexual intercourse in the privacy of his own home. Onfrey was incarcerated between the years 1978 to 1980. In this time, Onfrey appealed his case, arguing the unconstitutional violation of his privacy by law enforcement, but then was denied by the courts. It was 1980 when Onfrey was finally released due to the repealing of the consensual sodomy laws. Judge Jones declared, quote, all private consensual conduct would necessarily involve the exercise of a constitutionally protected fundamental right, unless the conduct in question jeopardizes the physical health of the participant. Jones essentially ruled that such deviant sexual intercourse could occur in one's home so long as it's consensual and not hurting anyone. This case did not legalize gay marriage, but opened a door for gay marriage to become legalized in New York in 2011. Prior to the Stonewall Uprising, the discrimination and police brutality to queer people had come to a head. Queer people were absolutely tired of feeling as inferior, immoral, and unworthy beings. All they wanted to do was to freely express themselves and feel joy in their lives with those who they love most. This exhaustion and unfair stigma of rulemaking and just public discrimination had led to the aggravated incident at Stonewall Inn. Queer people had finally decided to stand up for themselves with pride. After Stonewall, pride parades became a tradition in queer culture as a sign of community and strength. We would now like to give you a quote once said by Marsha P. Johnson. Quote, "History isn't something you look back at and say it was inevitable. It happens because people make decisions that are sometimes very impulsive and of the moment, but these moments are cumulative realities."